Welcome to The Explainer. We're jumping right in today, stepping straight into our philosophical gym for a seriously mind-bending thought experiment. We are going to examine the very fabric of reality and ask a question that has literally kept philosophers awake for centuries. Is morality an objective fact of the universe, or is it just a subjective lens we look through? Get ready because we're about to fundamentally challenge how you see every single action around you. Okay, let's dive into this with a little story. Imagine a woman named Virtue. She's just out in her garden, hanging up her laundry, when suddenly an alien spacecraft lands right next to her. The aliens are friendly, and they invite her for a ride over the city in their invisible ship. As they're floating above an alleyway, Virtue spots a mugger stealing a woman's purse. She points down and shouts, "Look, we have to help. What that man is doing is wrong." But the aliens? They just look completely baffled. They tilt their heads and ask, "Wait, where is the wrongness? We have the exact same 5 senses as you do. Sight, hearing, smell, taste, and touch. But we can't find this property you call wrongness anywhere." So, Virtue is what philosophers call a moral realist. She firmly believes that right and wrong are objective properties that exist out there in the world, just like the shape or the weight of a physical object. But the aliens have just exposed a fatal flaw in this view. Think about it. If moral values exist independently of us, how do we actually acquire knowledge of them? If they are completely invisible to our 5 human senses, how on earth do we ever detect them? I actually want to invite you to literally pause the explainer right here. Put yourself in Virtue's shoes for a second. If you witness someone stealing, do you really see the wrongness of that action in the exact same way you see the color of the thief's jacket? If we can't detect wrongness with our 5 senses, how do we know it even exists? Go ahead, take a second, debate this puzzle, and just hit play when you're ready. Welcome back. Okay, so Virtue isn't giving up. She tries to use a bit of logic to solve the aliens' puzzle. She argues that we can infer moral wrongness, just like we infer other invisible things in science. Think about magnetism, right? We can't see or taste a magnetic field, but we absolutely know it's there because we can observe its factual effect on iron filings. So she points out the observable facts of the mugging. Look at the is fact, she says. Stealing causes suffering and makes people unhappy. Therefore, we ought not to do it. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the trap Virtue just stepped into. It's incredibly famous in philosophy, known as Hume's law, or the is-ought gap. The aliens point out this massive logical divide between descriptive facts about what is happening in the world and normative values about what we ought to do. They counter her argument so brilliantly. They say, look, we agree that stealing causes suffering. That is a fact. But suppose a deeply cruel person actually delights in causing suffering, that cruel person will look at the exact same is facts and conclude that causing suffering is exactly what they ought to do. And you know what? They're totally right. You can't directly observe wrongness, but you also can't logically infer an ought from an is without bringing your own unproven assumptions into the mix. Time to pause again. Do you agree with the aliens here? Can factual observations, like the scientific fact that an action causes physical pain, ever strictly and logically prove a moral rule? Why or why not? Discuss it, and let's see where this rabbit hole goes. All right, let's move on and see how this builds, because we're heading into an entirely different theory now. If the wrongness isn't an objective fact out there in the alleyway, well, where is it? Frustrated, Virtue takes off her realist hat and she puts on a pair of emotional spectacles. According to this alternative view, the world itself is actually entirely value-free. Morality is not in the action at all. It's a lens we project onto the world based entirely on how we emotionally react to it. The 18th century philosopher David Hume really hit the nail on the head with this. He argued that if you examine a terrible crime, like a willful murder, you are never going to find the vice or the wrongness in the physical facts of the event. As Hume beautifully wrote, you never can find it till you turn your reflection into your own breast and find a sentiment of disapprobation, which arises in you towards this action. Basically, the wrongness is added entirely by the observer. And this elegantly explains exactly why the aliens couldn't find the wrongness out there in the world. They were quite literally looking in the wrong place. They needed to turn around and examine Virtue's internal emotions. Now, over the years, philosophers have taken this spectacles model and spun it into 3 distinct versions to explain how we create moral value. Let's map those out real quick. First up, we have subjectivism. This is the simplest version. It says that moral judgments are just personal claims about your own psychology. If I say killing is wrong, I am quite literally just stating a fact about myself. I'm saying I personally disapprove of killing. Now, the wild thing here is this means if a radically different person personally approves of killing, well, it is technically right for them. Number 2 is intersubjectivism. This zooms out a bit. It states that morality is still based entirely on feelings, but it's grounded in the collective feelings of an entire society or culture, rather than just one individual. So under this version, to say stealing is wrong actually just translates to my community disapproves of it. And finally, we have emotivism. This one takes a bit of a sharper turn. Emotivism argues that moral statements are not factual claims at all, not even claims about your own psychology. They are purely emotional expressions. Think of it like cheering for a team at a football match. Saying stealing is wrong is neither true nor false. It is just a vocal expression of a feeling. It's essentially just shouting, boo, to stealing. Okay, let's pause and grapple with this for a second, because it gets pretty unsettling. If subjectivism or emotivism is actually correct, then when two people violently disagree on a moral issue, they aren't actually arguing about facts at all. They're simply expressing clashing feelings, sort of like one person preferring chocolate and the other preferring vanilla. So, does this make morality trivial? Discuss this with your peers or just think on it for a moment, and I'll see you in a second. Welcome back to the gym. Now, if you felt a little uncomfortable with the spectacles model during your discussion, you are definitely not alone. It faces a massive, perhaps fatal counterargument known as the problem of error. Just think about it. If morality is just based on what I personally feel or what my community feels, then it is literally impossible for me or my community to ever make a real moral mistake. Let's test this out with our final pause. Think about the ancient Romans. They used to gather in amphitheaters and enthusiastically cheer for slaves being torn apart by wild animals just for entertainment. Under intersubjectivism, because their community felt it was acceptable, it was morally right for them. Do you actually buy that? Or do you strongly feel that an entire society can be morally mistaken? Pause, debate, and we'll wrap this up. And this brilliantly illustrates exactly why the spectacles model feels so incomplete. Imagine looking at a round tower in the distance. Because of a weird trick of the light, an entire crowd of people points at it and shouts, "That tower is square." Now, just because the whole collective group genuinely perceives it as square, does that magically make it square? No way. They're simply mistaken about an objective property of the world. See, when we use the words right and wrong, we aren't just talking about our feelings. Our very language demands that these words refer to objective properties. Properties that are just there anyway, completely regardless of how things strike us emotionally. The fact that we firmly believe the Romans made a moral error proves that we naturally treat morality as an objective standard that we can collectively get wrong. So, the crucial point is this: we are stuck in a massive philosophical stalemate here. These arguments pull us in completely opposite, incredibly frustrating directions. On the one hand, moral realism insists values are objective, but it faces the totally insurmountable difficulty of explaining how we actually detect them. On the other hand, the spectacles model perfectly explains how we know our values by pointing to our emotions, but it utterly destroys the possibility of ever making genuine moral mistakes. So where do we go from here? Well, some philosophers suggest a highly dramatic and deeply unsettling solution called error theory. They argue that yes, our moral language undeniably demands objective properties. But the aliens were right. Those objective properties just do not exist in the universe. Therefore, every single time we say stealing is wrong or charity is right, we are making a massive error. We're referring to something that literally isn't there. Under this theory, moral value is ultimately a complete illusion. I know, it's a whole lot to swallow, isn't it? But as we wrap up this explainer, I really want to leave you with this lingering, provocative thought. Is the only satisfactory solution to just admit that there's ultimately no such thing as moral value? Or, with enough thought, can we come up with a more palatable answer to bridge that gap between facts and feelings? Thank you so much for visiting the Philosophical Gym today. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll see you in the next one.